And as Iowans, we're used to having access to our nation's leaders. Now today, we're taking that a step further by bringing our keynote speaker into your office, your living room, or wherever you're watching. Julian Castro served as U.S. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development under President Barack Obama from 2014 to 2017. Before that, he was the mayor of his native San Antonio, Texas, the youngest mayor of a top 50 American city at that time. In 2012, he gave a rousing keynote speech at the Democratic National Convention, during which he described the American dream as a relay to be passed from generation to generation. In October of 2018, Little Brown published Castro's memoir, An Unlikely Journey, Waking Up from My American Dream. Secretary Castro launched People First Future in May to help elect bold, progressive candidates whose campaigns are focused on improving the lives of all people they hope to represent. Please help me in welcoming Julian Castro.
Hello and good afternoon. Thank you so much, Pastor, for the introduction. And a huge hello from San Antonio, Texas to everybody out there in the greater Des Moines area watching. I want to thank the Greater Des Moines Habitat for Humanity for inviting me to say a few words today. And just start off also by saying a huge felicidades, congratulations to all of the honorees that are being recognized for their wonderful work at creating housing opportunity in the community. I know what a difference that makes. I've seen it in action here in my hometown of San Antonio and in many communities when I was housing secretary under President Obama. So thank you for doing it. Your investment in time and energy and your resources is absolutely worthy of recognition and praise. It goes without saying that we find ourselves at a very unusual, challenging moment in our nation's history right now. One where millions of people are still out of work. COVID-19 has taken more than 200,000 American lives, where we continue to struggle for equality in this country of ours. It's a time when a lot of people are struggling. And that struggle is nothing new to so many of the people who have been hit the hardest, and also who have been asked to step up during this time. Essential workers who report to work in meatpacking plants or in the fields, grocery stores, fast food workers, healthcare workers, first responders. One of the questions that we have in front of us is how we get past this pandemic, how we ensure that everybody is able to be okay right now. The longer term question for our nation really is also, how do we use this as an opportunity? An opportunity to make sure that especially the most vulnerable in our nation have what they need to prosper. For they are the ones we have asked for from the most during this time, and they have stepped up in so many ways to ensure that we have food on the table, that folks who show up at the hospital have people to take care of them and treat them. In so many ways, they have continued to do their job so that we can prosper. When it comes to housing, we know that we have a short-term challenge in front of us. We have to ensure that the millions of people right now who are on the brink of eviction are able to stay in their homes by passing the HEROES Act in Congress and providing for direct rental assistance, ensuring that homeowners are not kicked off of their mortgage. And that's the short term. And that still has to be done. And I believe that it can be done. Right now in Washington, D.C., the House and the Senate are negotiating on a package that hopefully will do those things. But I wanted to speak today about the longer term challenge that we have. When I was housing secretary, I had the chance to travel to more than 100 different communities in 39 states. And if you follow housing like I know a lot of you do, you know that we had a real challenge before COVID-19 came along. We had a rental affordability crisis that was spiking rents all over the country, including in places like Des Moines and in smaller cities in Iowa. We had, for the last several years, a home ownership rate that has been underneath the home ownership rate for the average home ownership rate for most of the last 20 years. And in some communities, we're still trying to get over the Great Recession of a decade ago, when home ownership levels fell to their lowest level in 40 years. I'm convinced that we can do several things to make sure that everybody has housing opportunity in this country. In fact, I believe that we should treat housing as a human right. What are those things? Number one, we need to make a big investment again in this country in housing that is affordable to the middle class and to low-income individuals. We need to ensure that people can find a place to live, whether they live in a small town or a big city, that is affordable. Those who want to rent are able to rent, but also those who want to become homeowners are able to become homeowners. We need to increase the number of units out there that are available and also strengthen some of the best tools that we have to promote homeownership, like the FHA. And in addition to that, we also need to ensure that no matter who you are in this country, that you have fair housing opportunity. I'm proud that in 2015, in the Obama administration, we passed Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing, which was unfinished business from the 1968 Fair Housing Act that said to cities and counties, housing authorities that receive federal taxpayer dollars through HUD, you need to get serious about ensuring that there's equal housing opportunity wherever you are. Unfortunately, during this administration, we've taken a step backward on fair housing efforts. My hope is that beginning in January of 2021, we're going to take a step forward, again, not only in investing in housing opportunity with dollars, with resources, but also making sure that equal opportunity is embraced again, that we're moving forward as a country to living up to our highest ideals. And I know we're going to have a question and answer session, but I just wanted to spell out why I believe this is so important for our country. Because we know that housing is not just about a roof and four walls. That's something that the families that have benefited from the work of Habitat for so many years clearly understand. We know that housing is one of the best things that an individual and a family can have that promotes stability. When you have a safe, decent, affordable place, especially one of your own, you're able to learn better. You're more likely to get a better job. You're more likely to have better health outcomes. All of those things that are connected to economic mobility and to quality of life, those things are connected to safe, decent, affordable housing. So when we think about what Des Moines or Iowa or the United States of America needs so that everybody has a shot at achieving their American dream, you can't get there unless you address the need for housing that is affordable and the opportunity for people to own a home going forward. I believe that over the next several years that we're going to have that opportunity, that we're going to have that chance to make home ownership more real, to make affordable housing more available, and by doing that, to help lift up millions of American families who deserve their shot at the American dream like generations before. And that in doing that, we're going to create a brighter future for those families and for this country. Exactly what the Greater Des Moines Habitat for Humanity has been doing for families and individuals for many years. I want to thank you for it, and thank you for having me.
Well, Secretary Castro, thank you for your remarks, and we're glad to have you here in Des Moines virtually today. So it's exciting to have you and sharing your insights there, and I appreciate your really approaches on thinking about how important affordable housing is. And you did address some of the immediate needs that the pandemic has brought out on there. And what do you think might be some of the effects on the long term as we think about some of the low-income wage earners have been more affected by the pandemic, and it looks like there is a real possibility of a K-shaped recovery. So how does that play into affordable housing down the road?
Thanks a lot, Lance, for the invitation to be here. Thank you for the good work that you and the organization are doing. Well, I mean, to me, this is going to be really, I think, not only a missed opportunity, but the irony of ironies. If coming out of this pandemic, we don't ensure that those very people who are at the lower end of this income scale, that stepped up the most when we needed them for everybody else, if we don't ensure that our agenda includes investing in opportunity for them and their kids, whether it's educational opportunity, closing this digital divide that is hurting so many families right now as people go to remote learning, and especially housing opportunity, because we know that when the economy gets back up and going, that those housing prices are going to start spiking again like crazy, and rental costs are going to start going up tremendously, even though they have begun to fall a little bit in some places. That's not going to last. So to me, we need to be creative, and it means raising the minimum wage. It means investing in millions of new units of affordable housing in the years to come. It means using our tax code to promote home ownership opportunity, and also to make renting more affordable to people who need to rent. It also means working with local communities to make the creation of affordable housing more possible. I would like to see the federal government incentivize local communities to adopt land use codes that still maintain local control. I came out of local government, so I know how important that is as a former mayor, but gives them an incentive perhaps to adopt land use codes that make it easier for affordable housing to be developed, because oftentimes there is a NIMBYism and a blockage to affordable housing efforts, and I think that needs to change going forward.
And you did talk about how we want to increase affordable units, and there's a high need for that, and strengthening the tools. When we think about just examples that you might have seen, whether it's local examples that might be able to be scaled, or examples outside of the U.S., what would be some ways that we could really increase affordable housing and be able to look at the tools that are going to improve that?
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of great examples out there of communities that have invested in the creation of more units, everything from land banks to creative use of home dollars, CDBG dollars, obviously the low-income housing tax credit, to provide an additional number of housing units in those local communities. I think also that communities need to look at their land use codes and density, right? Because some of the smartest investments have been perhaps denser than some communities are used to. But if it's done in a way that includes the input of neighborhoods and the community, you have seen the ability to create more affordable housing units in nice communities where you don't have people just stacked on top of each other, but you have communities that work and promote a good quality of life. So I think all of that is possible, but at base, it's going to require greater resources there's no way that we're going to meet the affordable housing challenge without significant investment from the federal government in this, and a partnership with state governments, local governments, nonprofits, and the private sector. All of this is going to have to happen. Everybody's going to have to be working together. The good news is that, when we think about our federal initiatives, take something like the low-income housing tax credit, or even home and some CDBG programs. Those partnerships are fairly robust right now with the private and nonprofit sector. And so it's not like we're starting from scratch, but I think we need to breathe new life into them. I think it's been about 40 years in our country since we had a serious commitment to expanding affordable housing, and we need to get back to it. This pandemic has really shown us that we need to get back to covering the basics of what people need.
And as you talked about some of the tools and pieces on there, we had a question around mortgage income deduction on there. And, here in Iowa and your home state of Texas, those are considered actually maybe some of our more affordable places to live in the country. But a hard-working person earning $35,000, $40,000 isn't able to buy a piece of ground and build a house without a significant subsidy on there. At the same time, the mortgage interest deduction on our personal federal taxes, which I benefit from on there, it is, I think this year, estimated to be a value of $30 billion. That's like a bee with a boatload on there. And that it is really something that it's more than 90% of that subsidy, housing subsidy, goes to families earning more than $75,000. So might there be ways to, what are your thoughts around the mortgage interest deduction, and is that something that could help with affordable housing as well?
I absolutely believe it can. I think right now, look, I see a place for a mortgage interest deduction, but I think that it's too tilted in the direction of people who own higher end properties and are of significant means, and that perhaps we can formulate it in a smarter way to be able to invest some of those resources into the creation of affordable housing units, both for home ownership purposes and for rental purposes. A few years ago, if I remember correctly, then Representative Keith Ellison had a proposal to do that. And there have been other proposals as well that would not eliminate it, but I think would balance it out and invest resources where you have the heaviest need for affordable housing, both rental and home ownership opportunities.
And I think also we've had a number of questions that we're trying to get at what we could do locally, and particularly around when we talk about the home ownership disparities and wealth disparities that are experienced by people of color. What should local communities be thinking about for policies that can move the needle and help in those areas?
Well, I think that local communities should take a long, hard look at the land use regulations that they have in place, at the history of development in their own community, because every community is different. They should ensure that they have robust fair housing efforts in their community. As you know, there are nonprofit organizations that do this work to help ensure that there's equal opportunity there. And also, there needs to be an education process oftentimes that happens for neighborhoods that sometimes are still being integrated, basically, both racially and also in terms of the type of housing that exists there. You have a lot of suburbs throughout this country, and not only suburbs, but neighborhoods within cities, there's bigger cities as well, that are still uncomfortable with the idea of affordable housing going into the neighborhood or higher density. And to me, there needs to be an education process and a breaking down of those barriers in a way that is inclusive, that seeks input from people in neighborhoods. But the challenge is that those attitudes oftentimes end up blocking the chance for people of color and low-income individuals of any background to be able to live in what Raj Chetty a few years ago and his research team called high opportunity areas, where their family is more likely to go to a good school, be able to get better jobs, and have better life outcomes. And this is a challenge for every single community. I think that we can work on that, and if we do work on that, it's going to allow many families right now, many families of color, to be able to prosper more in the years to come.
And I think around that area on there, and one of maybe of our challenges for our metro area is how do we think about those areas of opportunity regionally, and how would we go about trying to bring multiple jurisdictions together to be able to really have a conversation about housing from a regional standpoint and those areas of opportunity from a regional standpoint. Do you have any thoughts on how we could approach that?
I absolutely do. In fact, when I was at HUD, one of the things that we launched was something called the Prosperity Playbook. And that was the idea. It was, hey, look, oftentimes, particularly suburban areas, this is kind of new to them. Many suburbs don't think of themselves as having to provide affordable housing opportunity. That was not the way that the suburb came into being. Unfortunately, in a lot of cases, people were running away from that at one time and created enclaves in suburbs. To their credit, a lot of suburbs have diversified and have changed a lot in the last 50 years. But still, oftentimes, city council members and other leaders in suburban cities are not a part of the conversation of creating affordable housing. Oftentimes, they're not a part of the conversation of creating transit opportunity, whether it's bus lines or in some places rail lines. In fact, sometimes they actively reject that. So the question becomes, what can you do to enhance regional cooperation on housing, on transit, on job opportunities, other things? Our initiative was about actually getting people in the same room, starting there, and laying out on maps sort of what the assets are, who's doing what in terms of housing, in terms of transit and other things, and how people could plan regionally and create a regional vision for all of these things that does connect the dots between housing and transit and economic development and education. I was very surprised when I was mayor at how few opportunities we do take as local leaders to actually engage in that kind of visioning and to start working together. You would think that it happens more often than it does, but it often doesn't. And where it does, it's in some regional transportation committee or some other regional body that oftentimes is not very strong, doesn't have a very powerful voice politically. It's not the same as getting the mayors of a region together or the county supervisors of a region together at the same time, trying to get them on the same page, working together, putting the egos aside, because then you get into you have the big city, and are they going to try and tell everybody what's what? You need to start working through all of that in a practical way. The upside of that is that can be very helpful when you're drawing down state resources and federal resources. If you get that down well, then I think it sort of provides a glide path for everything else.
Well, thank you. Nate, and this I think is going to be our last question on there, but what are you most hopeful for around affordable housing and as you look down the road here?
Well, unfortunately, we've had to go through bad times in our nation's past to recognize the need to invest in ourselves and in community. We're going through a rough time right now, health-wise, economically, but I also think it's a time where people are recognizing that, we can't go on the way that we've been going on. we can't go on becoming a country where fewer and fewer people are doing better and better, and more people are falling behind, and inequality is growing. We have to get on a different track. And part of getting on a different track is making sure that people can afford something as basic as a decent place to live. So I hope it's been a wake-up call, not only about healthcare in our country, but about housing. I'm hopeful about that. And of course, hopeful about this election that we have coming up in about a month. And I know we're not talking politics today, but I do think that we have an opportunity to change direction, and affordable housing investment, I think, is very much a part of changing that direction.
Secretary Castro, a huge thank you for being with us today and coming to Des Moines virtually, and that we just appreciate your insight and your willingness to share with all the Habitat family and and our Key Awards today. So thank you for your time today.
Thanks a lot. I love the work y'all do. Take care.
And to our audience, just hang on 1 minute, and I'm going to move over to the podium and we'll have our final words.